Hello, everybody. This is Jason from Con+3, and I am here with Liz Chipradit from Angry Hamster Publishing. Hello.
Hello.
So, we have known each other for some time, pretty much since the birth of Angry Hamster Publishing. I remember when, out of the blue, you sent through a kind of almost prototype little file of your new baby and said to me, please, can you review this on your channel? Which would become Witch, of course. But what I've never asked you before, and I've always been curious, why Angry Hamster Publishing as a name?
Basically, it's named after a miniature giant space hamster from Baldur's Gate. His name's Boo, and he goes for the eyes. But I was trying to think of a name for my company and my husband because I love rodents and I've had quite a few hamsters. And my husband was just like, "Oh, Angry Hamster Publishing," or like my boyfriend at the time, and it kind of stuck with me. And then I'm like, "That's a stupid name. I'm not going to name my company that." Um, And then I just started calling my company that, and then all of a sudden that was the name, and it hasn't changed since. And I love it.
There we go. Yeah, cool. And obviously, sort of short. I think it was shortly after you sent through your kind of prototype for which it then went to Kickstarter, did very very well, and that kind of got the ball rolling for your company. And you've obviously made products since then as well. But originally, where did the actual concept for which come from? This kind of, sort of gothic, quite dark, modern fantasy horror.
Well, I had been always writing different role play systems, just kind of in the back of my head. And at first, I had kind of this idea for this huge combined world with all these different types of supernaturals, and you could play every single supernatural. And at one point, I had to narrow it down. And like witchcraft, and like being kind of a fan of those things, insofar as like, when I was a younger teen, I said that I was into Wicca, and stuff like that. And I was watching all the TV shows and stuff like that. And then as I got older and became more and more of an atheist, slowly dropped that away, but still, very much, something within that genre spoke to me. And so then when I was narrowing down what I wanted to actually do, I decided that, kind of the whole witch aspect would be the best way to go. And like the darker, grittier setting, is mainly because I just wanted to play something serious. I enjoy playing more serious games, at least if I want to play a long campaign. And that's always what I imagined for a game that I would create. And that's kind of how Witch was born.
Okay. Having said that, I know that it is a generally serious game, but from reading it, for example, with things like the classes, they do have their own quirky traits, which, to me anyway, they come across as quite kind of upbeat. Of oh yeah, they've got these sort of personalities, and it's kind of enticing rather than always sort of serious and brooding. But yeah, I think it works really well. I'm not saying that's criticism, but I just noticed it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not awkward, but I always like finding kind of the humorous situations. Even when I'm playing quite a serious game, there has to be like just a session where you're laughing with
Mm.
your friends and enjoying yourself because otherwise, dark isn't dark. Like if you're constantly living in just terrible conditions and everything's drama and everyone constantly mistrusts everyone and there's no joy, like I think that the dark isn't that dark. You know what I mean? You start kind of being cold and stoic and mistrusting everybody. And I think you kind of need those fun little quirks and those moments of levity to just really make the dark all the more dark and kind of give you something also as a player to invest in, right? Because, of course,
Mm.
in role play games, your character in theory is always invested in their lives. But you, as a player, at one point can just check out if everything you've done so far is just a misery, you know? So having kind of those weird things in there, which kind of make you smile or are a bit tongue in cheek, I think like kind of keeps the joy in the game a little bit.
Mm. When you run games yourself, or I don't know how regularly you play it as well, um, with things like the darkness, that can manifest in the actual mechanics as well as narration, of course. But in terms of how you see Witch, is it something, say for example, you get kind of mechanics that say, okay, in a year's time, this may happen or this may develop. So quite sort of longevity of the game. But do you see it as quite a slow, not slow paced game, but kind of slow building, almost like a horror game? Or do you see it more as kind of you get your points of action, cinematics with more downtime in there?
Well, I think like with Witch and with a lot of games that I design, there's always kind of two stories going on, right? So there's your character story, which is like a slow burn, and in which that's represented by you continuously having to make deals with your demon,
Hmm.
and then the demon will ask you to do something. And normally those are just longer quests that you can't complete in a session. Um, so the ultimate goal is to tell a really cool story about your character, but then that longer story is broken up kind of episodically by having little missions that you're gonna do, and like going, let's go to the other world because the other world is the ghost world, because the other world ruler wants us to do something. So you also get those kind of small quests with action, which kind of break up the longer story of things. So it's kind of both. But yeah, it's definitely meant for a campaign play, just mainly so that you can. Yeah, yeah. So basically, the main goal is character story, and that requires like a longer campaign. Basically, that's all I was saying. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I mean, with have you ever done any one shots of this before? Because I'm assuming you've demoed this at conventions. So if you have you done it kind of as a more explosive, fast paced thing?
Yeah, then we do, the typical like 4 hour session where
Yeah.
some fays have taken a child. It's something like that. And like, you need to get the kid back and then, you get the reward from the parents or things like that. And then normally within that, like, because, that's always with conventions, you always kind of just give people like a glimpse of what your game is. And then at the end of it, it's like, oh, yeah. And then you have all these extra cool things you can do with your character later on.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's normally what we do. Just like one big kind of explosive adventure, and then your character walks off into the sunset towards their next story.
Cool. All right, let's move on a little bit to some of your other products. So the the way I see Afterlife, Wandering Souls is almost a bit like the cousin of Witch. Whether that's what it's meant to be or not, obviously I don't know entirely. It's up to you. But um, with Afterlife, it's very interesting because there are things that do kind of reflect towards Witch. There's obviously the supernatural element, but it is still quite different. From a mechanics point of view, is there any particular reason why you kind of streamlined it more to surrounding a pool of d6s and moving away from 2d10s?
Yeah, I mean, I just think which, though I love the game, was like the first game that I designed. And since then, I mean, I've played so many more games and I've also written for so many more systems. So I think just Afterlife is kind of the culmination of my refining my skill, basically. And I think there's a lot of things I love about Witch, but I think if I were to write Witch today, it would look mechanically a lot more like Afterlife, probably a little more crunchy than Afterlife, but it would look a lot more like Afterlife than it would like how Witch looked, basically. Because I just think I didn't have the language, the mechanics language, to kind of convey what I really wanted to do with Witch as much as I did with Afterlife.
So you're thinking maybe a second edition of Witch?
I'm hoping we have um, this year. We're coming out with another Witch game, which is based around the tarot deck. And that's going to be kind of an adventure in a box, like kind of like the legacy games, the legacy board games, if you know anything about those. And that'll be for Witch in the Witch world, and it'll all be one thing. But yeah, once we sell through Witch, I would love to go back and kind of design it with what I know now.
Awesome, awesome. One thing as well about Afterlife that I particularly like, it's almost like you've taken sort of stuff from lichers with Witch and the kind of okay they kind of deteriorate a little bit and they're slowly changing over time, but you've taken that up to 100 with Afterlife in that things are changing constantly and there's so much fluidity. So is that something that you see as kind of the pinnacle for Afterlife and making it different?
The changes in the character.
Yeah, sorry. So taking the characters, taking their surroundings, they're changing a lot over time. Whereas with Witch, things are kind of more static. Okay, this is your class, this is your character, this is how they might behave.
Basically, yeah, so the entire game of Afterlife is just a journey of self-discovery. Because unlike Witch, where you can kind of have these unrelated missions, the entire point of Afterlife is finding your past memories and revealing kind of who you were before you died. So you're constantly changing. You're getting these things called death marks, which are like these symbols on your skin. You may even physically change in the game. For example, we had someone who started off the game as a child and then grew up, like his character through unlocking memories, grew up in the game. Um, as you discover who you are, who you were, and kind of marry the two things, because who you are in the Tenebris, so who you are in the after, totally different than who you were in the real world, and how you meet at that point and find some sort of self acceptance of who you are in the past or who you are now is kind of the core tenet of what Afterlife is.
Okay. And obviously as well, it's got kind of a very dark element. So again, sort of similar tone to Witch. But in terms of your third product, so in fact, sorry, I missed out a question. Let me start again. Oh dear. Cool. So, I do want to touch on the artwork as well for those two books because as soon as you sent through your first art of the kind of the crocodile man and the witches around, I really enjoyed the whole kind of dark and light, warm and cool colors contrast. It's very kind of bold. Lots of sort of dark purples in there as well. It really kind of sparks off things like the new Sabrina series,
Yeah.
that kind of dark, like things are lurking type thing in the shadows. So, um, in terms of how you convey what you see to artists, how do you do that?
Well, first, I'm very careful about the artists I choose. Just in terms of I kind of troll through hundreds of people before I find a style that I'm really into. Um, and that's really important to me because if you find someone who is already kind of drawing what's in your mind, when you go to convey, like, I need someone fighting a skeleton or I need someone hugging a skeleton on a boat, um, you're pretty sure basically that their style is already going to kind of be what you want. But I also make pretty extensive mood boards where they can kind of see the general style and feeling that I'm going for. And if you look at Witch's mood board compared to Afterlife, you'll see two completely stylistic different games. Um, and then the actual communication of what I want drawn will be something like I want a human, a live human. Hugging a skeleton on a boat. And I'll say something like that. And I'll say, here's the mood board, do it in your style. And then normally they'll send me a sketch, and that's about it. Just because I had done so much pre selection, that has worked extremely well for me.
Okay, but you say that yeah, it does look a little different in Afterlife. So to me anyway, it kind of gives off a sort of more ambiguous murkiness, like the colors are softer.
Yeah.
Um, I suppose would it be a case of it's depicting kind of expanse and sort of wandering or something like that?
Yeah, kind of the wantonness of going through the desert. And there's also like small elements. I was very inspired by like, all the flowers and stuff in Art Nouveau. So you have like kind of this very intense floral style and then kind of emptiness.
Mm.
And then the artist kind of trying to match those two together in their pieces.
Okay, yeah. And also the tarot deck that comes with Witch is also artwork that you've done as well. Um, was that something that came a bit later after you came up with the mechanics, or was it something that you knew from the start there has to be a tarot deck in here somewhere, just because of the nature of what kind of stories you can tell with it?
There had to be a tarot deck in there somewhere. But I didn't think that I would get to the point in funding with which that I would actually be able to make one. So I was like, yeah, there's a tarot deck and all witches use them and it's really awesome. But I didn't actually think that I would include it in the book because I just didn't think that it would get to the level of funding that it did. I just assumed my like parents and my cousins and my friends would give me some money and I could make a fun book, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember now, actually. There were a few stretch goals, and I really wanted the tarot deck to come through, and I'm very pleased it did.
Yeah, me too. That's yeah, that was such a shock.
Mm. So, for people who don't know how to play Witch, could you just explain how you've implemented the tarot deck into it as the mechanics?
Okay, so basically, in which we have an item called the Devil's Deck, and you can actually use it as your character to divine certain answers to questions that you have. So, like, you can ask your GM a question and draw a card, and it can, you know, point you in a certain direction. And witches can also just use them as games. So, because like basically we're going back to kind of the Italian roots of the tarocchini, which is basically just a tarot deck as a deck of cards, not as a divining thing. So um, it has two separate meanings because the actual devil's deck in the game is only the major arcana, and all the additional cards are just the cards that you use to play a game with.
Okay, but it's completely optional, isn't it? You don't need it.
No, no, oh, definitely not. No, I mean, I realize, you know, there's always a barrier to play with all role play games, you know, whether that's affording a PDF or dice or whatever. And I was just like, I couldn't at that stage, I'm like, I couldn't make it required for the game, right? Like,
Sure.
because there's no good online source for a randomized tarot deck, you know what I mean? Um, yeah, yeah, no, it's not required.
Mm. Although, having said that, I recommend getting it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, for example, I just did, I have a Patreon with my friend Steffi, and I made it, and with that, I ended up making just a PDF of basic cards with the names on them so that people could play with them because, yeah, but
Awesome.
it's not the same as having the real art.
No, no, absolutely not. Okay. So yeah, your other main product, which we're also giving away today, is Familiars of Terror, which is quite different from what you've produced before.
Yeah.
There are, like Familiars of Terror, there are some systems now, or some companies that are starting to produce books for kind of aimed for a younger audience, so young teen, children even. So with Familiars of Terror, I know that there's kind of a bit of a his Dark Materials vibe where you've got your familiar and so on. Even a bit of Pokemon came across to me that you have your sort of companion who can help you. But what were your main goals that you wanted to achieve, kind of taking this slightly different direction with Familiars of Terror?
Well, I started writing Familiars of Terror because I'm so sick of living in Witch's world. Like, like you know,
Okay.
there's only so much darkness you can write. Like before you're just like something something dark, shadow, yes, vampire, yes, magic. Oh no, horrible. Um, so I just needed to write about people with their cool animals traveling around in the world.
Mm.
So that's kind of where it came from. And then once I, you know, and I wanted a kind of Pokemon type game, um, because I love Pokemon and I love Digimon and I love his Dark Materials. Like, you know, just I want an animal companion. I want if there's a class in any game and there's a person with an animal companion, I will play that person.
Mm.
Or I will try to be another person who somehow still gets an animal companion. Um, but once I started focusing Familiars of Terra, the game very much became about heroes trying to heal a broken world. So trying to be the in the world, and you know also people kind of supporting you being that light because that's fun to be a hero.
Yeah, yeah. So much more positive spin. Do you see it as yeah, to me it comes across as almost kind of more epic as well, in that you might go on these long journeys again, kind of like with Pokemon, you going from one place to another, you're discovering stuff, but you're sort of slowly evolving with your companion.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like, you know, you each actually end up getting kind of a legendary legacy.
Ah, okay.
So, you know, your familiar can end up becoming one of these things called an ancestor, which is like one of these giant creatures. And you, as a character, continuously get titles too. So you play a seeker, That's like Terra's version of a hero. And as you quest, you get more and more titles till at one point, they'll know you as like Jason the Great, companion of Leia, savior of Lone Tree. You know what I mean? And it'll continue going on and on. And you have kind of like this epic destiny, and people will tell stories about you for ages to come.
What's the longest title you've ever seen?
I've had like a five. The thing is, with my players, I refuse to go any longer than five. Though we've play tested for quite long. So I think like my husband ended up racking up like seven titles or something like that. And I was just like, you're getting three from this villager. He knows the rest, but you're getting three,
Yeah, at this rate, it sounds like it's going to get as long as Daenerys Targaryen, Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons, la la la.
Exactly, exactly. The unburnt, and yet
Yes,
the burnt at another time when he did that other thing.
exactly. Yeah. Okay, and start rounding off now. You did indeed mention that you have a Patreon with Steffi Devan,
Mhm.
and you also have a little collaboration in the works. Can you tell us a little bit about your two women in gaming?
Yeah, so Steffi is someone I met kind of around about the times that I started doing Witch. We were both freelancing for Onyx Path Publishing, and her name sounded very Dutch. So I ended up sending her an email like, "Hey, your name sounds very Dutch," and like we've been working together since then. And we decided to do a Patreon together, and we challenged ourselves last year to make 12 games in the space of 12 months, which we were successful with. Very proud of us. They're mini games. They're not like, huge things like Witch. But what we did was we compiled them into an anthology, and we actually kickstarted that at the start of this year, and sending the files to the printer on Monday, actually.
Awesome.
So it's 12 indie games, six by Steffi, six by me. And we have anything from a game about Alice returning to Wonderland to demon slayers to a game about people with powers. I mean, oh, and Steffi has a game about kitten witches, which is also
Okay.
very interesting. So there are just any kind of weird game that came out of her head last year.
Awesome, awesome. So, just for a little bit of fun at the end, pick one of these three infamous creatures from horror: changelings, vampires, or werewolves.
Werewolves,
Werewolves. Any particular reason that you prefer werewolves?
you know. Uh, if you vampires versus werewolves, always werewolves. So
Well,
spoke to
that's
me.
why I put in a third one, and I wanted to not have witch or witches, because presumably you pick that.
Yeah, no, I'm always, like werewolf lore gets me. And it's also, it's like when I'm watching Vampire Diaries, I'm also still team werewolf, and there's a lot of supernaturals there. So
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks very much for the interview today, Liz, and thanks very much for sponsoring us once again.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Tarfadikun. I'm the owner of Angry Hamster Publishing, and I'm asking that you please donate to the Butterfly Project. It's a great cause, and the more games that we can get to these kids, the better. Thanks.